Hello, everyone, and welcome to Author Talks, a series put on by the Hunter J. Francois Library in celebration of National Library Week. We are here at the South Louis Community College in the reading room of the Hunter J. Francois Library, and we are about to hear a distinguished author speak about his own writing. And just before we begin, let me take the opportunity to recognize a number of people in the room with us. We want to thank you for being here. Firstly, our esteemed author, Mr. Rick Wayne. It's a pleasure to have you here at the South Louis Community College. I also want to recognize in-house our acting principal, Dr. Merle Sinclair Auguste, as well as our librarian, who has been the chief steward in organizing all of those activities, Mrs. Kathy McDiarmid. We have some really specially invited guests here this afternoon. I'd like to recognize and honor Miss Margot Thomas, who has been doing exceptional work as an archivist in St. Lucia. We have with us an author who has presented here as part of the series, Mr. McDonald Dixon. Thank you so much for being here. I also want to recognize Ms. Dawn French, who has worked as an author with the college as well, and she is here in the audience. Another specially invited guest, I want to recognize Mr. John Elliott, who was in our previous sitting. We thank you for being here today. Mr. Jerry George, who we celebrate as a professional media person and who's also contributing to the college, our faculty, our staff and students of the college who are here. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm afternoon to you, and it is warm outside, but we are cool in here, and I'm sure, given the author, things will get hot in here. I expect it to be fiery, and I also know there are people who have come prepared with questions. So without further ado, and with this, welcome to the author series, and again, wishing librarians everywhere special congratulations in spreading the work that you do in literacy, in preserving our culture, in recognizing important individuals like Mr. Wayne in the community. I hope you've had a really great week, and we look forward to the work that you have been doing so far coming out to the public. So, ladies and gentlemen, for now, this is the final author in this series. I'm sure you will have others to come. But with no further ado, let me invite student Ms. Bijani Fanis to introduce our distinguished author.
Rick Wayne, CBE, OBE, has many professions under his belt, including being a pop singer, former professional bodybuilder, author, journalist, and talk show host. Born in St. Lucia, in the 1950s, he emigrated to England and served 2 years in the Royal Signals. On returning to civilian life in London, he was spotted singing in a club and successfully auditioned for record producer Joe Meek. Renamed as Ricky Wayne, a combination of Ricky Nelson and John Wayne, he released a single, Hot Chickaroo, which was produced by Meek. Wayne established a singing career for several years and for a while had his own show on the Radio Luxembourg. Wayne was also a professional bodybuilder in the 1960s and 1970s, competing in several bodybuilding competitions. His titles include several Mr. Europe, Mr. World, Mr. Universe, and Mr. Pro America titles between 1964 and 1974. Wayne is the author of numerous articles and books on bodybuilding and politics. While pursuing a professional bodybuilding career, he began to write regularly for bodybuilding magazines, particularly Joe Weider's Muscle Builder and Flex in the 1970s and 1980s. He also wrote for Dan Lurie's Muscular Development magazine in 1994 to 1995. Wayne moved back to St. Lucia and in 1986, in collaboration with his wife, a former US bodybuilder, founded the Star Publishing Company. Its publications included a newspaper, the St. Lucia Star, and two magazines, Tropical Traveler and She Caribbean. Wayne served as an opposition party senator until 1998 and was the host of a politically charged local television talk show simply called Talk. He is the author of Lapses and Infelicities 2010, Foolish Virgins, 2002, It's Right in the Morning, 1977, Women of the Olympia, 1981, with George Snyder, Muscle Wars, 1985, Pose Down, Muscle Talk with the Champs, 1987, with George Snyder. Wayne has also written Arms and Shoulders Above the Rest, 1976, The Body Men, 1978, The Body Men 2, 1979, Three More Reps, books 1, 2, and 3 with George Snyder. He is known for hard hitting interviews and fiery comments about various ills on the island. He champions press freedom, whether locally or internationally. Let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Rick Wayne.
But before we hear from Mr. Rick Wayne, after that, hearing that biography, we need to get a little more intimate. And I hear this next person can share some insight into Rick Wayne. So we invite Miss Margot Thomas to share with us before the author begins. Miss Thomas?
Thank you very much. Natalie, we're going to get intimate. That's what you said? Anyhow, I am very happy to be here this afternoon and to add a little more to this in depth introduction of our guest speaker. When we hear the name Rick Wayne, what comes to mind? Ah, very good. Boldness, fist in the eye. Yes, yes, yes. Anything else? Oh, yes. So it tells me that you know
But I
a
know
lot about
that you know that I
Rick
know.
Wayne. Yes, you know what I know, and yes. It occurs to me that hardly a day goes by without the name Rick Wayne being associated with something new. Depending on the season, he has been variously called the conscience of the nation, the voice of the voiceless, as well as the enemy within. And an, I wouldn't say old, but an elderly gentleman on a television advertisement once called him Rick. He is vice versa. I'm sure you can remember that. Yes. It all depends on who is describing him, however, whether a rescued defenseless victim of egregious abuse, a casualty of police brutality, a politician defrocked, a thin-skinned prime minister. In all events, he is one of our country's most controversial sons, about which he may have something to say should you be curious enough to open that particular Pandora's box. At age over 100, by his own count, he has straddled at least 3 different worlds. Listen, that of professional sports and showbiz, as well as the literary world. And in his heyday, just imagine, he was multiple times winner of, and Miss Fanny told us, Mr. America, Mr. World, Mr. Universe. He doesn't belong here.
Never won Mr. St. Lucia though.
Beg pardon?
Never won. Not was never good enough to be Mr. St. Lucia.
Oh, we'll come to that later.
Hmm?
He recorded several hit songs while living in the UK And his most popular one was In My Imagination. We'll ask him. We'll ask him. He was for several years the editor of Muscle and Fitness and Flex magazines, which are considered the Bibles of the fitness industry. His monthly articles for the two magazines have been published in French, in Arabic, Spanish, Greek, and Chinese. Imagine that. Resulting in fans the world over. He has received several bodybuilding accolades, and 10 years ago, he was inducted into the California-based Bodybuilding Hall of Fame. Don't be afraid to applaud. We shall have to set up a Hall of Fame for bodybuilding, journalism, sports, you name it. And Rick would fit right there. Much inspiring information related to his career in the bodybuilding and fitness fields can be accessed via YouTube. And did you know that recently released on the channel is a well-received 3-part interview with popular American podcaster John Hanson? Check it out. Despite his evident love-hate relationship with his fellow St. Lucians, a relationship he not so secretly relishes, he was honored in 2020 with the Citizen of the British Empire, CBE, and earlier he was the recipient of the Order of the British Empire, OBE, both awards for his contributions to journalism and sports. By the way, it would be instructive to hear from him personally which comes first, bodybuilding or writing. At this stage, I am putting my hand up for writing. He has authored several books, among them, It Will Be All Right in the Morning, Foolish Virgins, Lapses and Infelicities, Muscle Wars, 3 More Reps, and also thousands of articles from magazines and newspapers, including his own publication, which we all know, the Star newspaper, now online. Listen very carefully to what an American reviewer wrote about It Will Be All Right in the Morning. Quote, "There is no pedantry, no wearisome show of neutrality, or the coy evasiveness of the book learner. Instead, the story is told from a definite point of view, with all the bias, but also with the boldness, the detail, the brilliance of opinion that the style allows. Its lessons apply generally. Every West Indian politician, every citizen must study it if he must understand more deeply the opportunity, the seriousness, and the responsibility of politics. He must understand that the press must be free and that it is endangered. Foreign interests must be restrained and are not. Self-styled intellectuals are not always as knowledgeable as they might seem, unquote. Much food for thought. The reviewed book, prophetic as it has turned out, was first published in 1979, the year of our nation's independence. Since that time, it has been reprinted several times. In fact, Hunter J. Francois, after which the library is named, also reviewed It Will Be All Right in the Morning. And now, ladies and gentlemen, make some noise for our singular guest, Mr. Wade.
Make some noise. Well, thank you very much. I think I might start with first of all, how many people here want to be writers? Not one hand? Nobody here wants to be a writer. Okay, so let's go. So I'm going to ask the other questions. Why are you here? Come on, guys. All right. I think I ought to begin with well, how many of you here actually knew Hunter J. Francois? About five. No. Kendall. Apart from the writers here, like Kendall and welcome, Mark and so on, how many of the younger people here, younger, know anything about Hunter Francois? Not you, Margaret. You're not one of the younger people. I asked the question very, very seriously. I followed Calix George's talk, and he seemed very, very disappointed that so little was known about citizens' native sons when the opposite ought to be true. We know next to nothing about our great sons, and we don't seem to care about that, and we don't even know enough to know that we should care. That not caring and not knowing makes you lesser the St. Lucian you think you are. That when you talk about pride, I'm a St. Lucian, the real St. Lucian, and what is the real St. Lucian? You know nada about the people who make St. Lucia St. Lucia. Because without the people, it's just a rock. It's nothing. It's the people who make St. Lucia. And if you know nothing about its greatest sons, because I know you know even less about Walcott. I'm not even going to push that. I know you know even less about Walcott. I'm off. I was in that group when I wrote a book called Muscle Wars. I think you have a copy of that book, Margot, Muscle Wars, published by St. Martin's Press in New York. And I would, every now and again, fly from California to New York for talks, editorial talks with them about the book. And almost every time they would talk about two writers, one of whom they published, James Baldwin, and the other was Derek Walcott. And I would sit there and pretend, oh, yeah, yeah. And I knew nothing of consequence, nothing of relevance, nothing significant about Derek Walcott. I was so ashamed. I eventually tracked Walcott down with Derek, and he was in some off-Broadway play. If she invited me to, I couldn't do it. But ever since, I've made a point of making up for it and getting to know who Derek Walcott is. And I'm proud to say that I know Derek Walcott as nobody else knows Derek Walcott, which is not to say I know the most about Derek Walcott. It means in the way I know Derek Walcott, nobody else does. Of course, that means, and I include his closest relatives. I know him from Rick Wynn's perspective, and I like to say that. I like to brag about that because he's not the only one. I know a number of people, celebrities here, elsewhere, and I always say I know them as nobody else knows them because I know them Ala Rick Wayne's vision. I don't just read about him in the books and so on. At this point, I want to I want to tell a little bit about Hunter Francois. Hunter Francois was a poet. I didn't know him really as a poet, but I knew him pretty good as a minister of education. And, it's a measure of how far we've regressed when you think of people like Hunter Francois when they were in Parliament. I remember Hunter Francois standing up. By that time, he had removed himself from the John Compton's party, and he was sort of an independent. And he would almost predictably start up and he'd go, before I go any further, I should point out that the recordings of what are the happenings in this house, words to that effect, are being done a terrible service. And then he would start reading all the bad writing, the misspelled words, etc., right there in part of it. He would give a lesson, in English, a lecture, and nothing to do with the bill. I understood that when he eventually moved to Radio St. Lucia, Jerry George might know that, he actually had a blackboard with words and their meanings and their pronunciation so that, like, remember that, etc. Very, very interesting man. I would say my relationship with him, up and down, ambivalent, as my relationship is with every politician. Today I'm happy with you, tomorrow I'm not. Today they love me, tomorrow they don't, etc. I mean, we're kind of like that. Anyway, I went off to the States after spending some time here, and I went to California, and in California, I wrote It'll Be Right in the Morning. And we will come to that in due course, but right now, I want to read a little bit. Hunter and I were not friends at all when he wrote what I'm about to read. I just read Rick Wayne's book, God Moves, etc. Guess Nixon was his own Rick Wayne. The book is mean. The book is factual. The book is frightening. Before we start moralizing, we must remember that all things are relative. The book is not trashy, except to trash cans, Beast of God, etc. Guess American investigative reporting. These are just ellipses after he called it rambling in the morning. Guess American investigative reporting is one of today's brutal, barbarous, mixed evils. It's not all right in the morning, but it is yet morning. I must write. Book, pamphlet, tract. Keats said, when I have fears, etc. It's not like that. But how does one write a book? The hand is too slow for the head. I have no tape recorder. Guess each book must be 100th of the whole, like catching a raindrop. It's not all right in the morning. Rick Wayne's book tells me I must write now. A tract will do. And then he has what is called an introduction, in parentheses, which may be skipped. It is perhaps impossible to consider this book without some comment on the author, and this is because some of it is about himself. In a way, it brings V.S. Naipaul to mind, especially the suffrage of Elvira. The detached, unrelenting, and unsympathetic portrayal of the characters and their doings never flags. Rick Wayne is totally devoid of that admittedly rare commodity, love. In this, he resembles the politicians whom he depicts, at least in the setting in which he depicts them. Ruthless, scheming, hating, vindictive, motivated only by the individual lust for power and or of the pickings of the honorable elected. In a word, immoral. We welcome the book. It will indeed titillate the savage envy of aspiring dunces. Its usefulness would not have been impaired by the omission of an intimacy here, an unguarded remark there, on the part of those not involved in the grimmer aspects of the subject. And in these instances, the exposure will be regretted by the more humane of its readers. by the more humane of its readers. We deplore Nixon-type use of recording devices. We deplore that the individual is entitled to privacy. I'm sorry, we believe that the individual is entitled to privacy. That betrayal of confidence is vile. But the politician in this region thinks or professes otherwise. And I will stop here and let you do a little comparing this of all these wonderful things I heard about Rick Wayne. As a matter of fact, I want to thank you, Margot, for your especially kind words. And for a moment there, I wondered who you might be talking about. I wish also to thank the courageous other individuals responsible for my appearance here, Kathy in particular, who kept in touch, patiently answered my oft-repeated queries, and updated me on related matters. Thank you. As for you, the presumed curious ambitious, it's my earnest wish that you will find encouragement in what I'm about to tell you concerning my literary inspirations and aspirations and how I go about doing my work. I say work, even though writing is for me a labor of love, a guilty pleasure, something I enjoy, perhaps too much. But just so you don't understand me too quickly, let me assure you from the get-go that writing is work, damn difficult work. And it does not become easier over time. The more proficient the writer, the harder it is to produce publishable material, work worthy of a reader's time, work that justifies the writer's reputation. Several years ago, the late Derek Walcott afforded St. Lucian lovers of literature the opportunity to hear the renowned Arthur Miller speak of his works at a venue in the north of England, in the north of Ireland, in the north of our islands. Why is Ireland occurring to me, and why is England occurring? A packed house showed up on a Friday evening. Alas, many of the presumed bookworms I spoke with afterward had never read Miller. Not Death of a Salesman, not The Crucible, nada. I was rendered slack-jawed when a locally published poet told me his favorite Miller novel was Tropic of Cancer, which of course is by another Miller. Why then had so many purchased tickets to the symposium? What do I know? We're all St. Lucians here. We know well our peculiarities. Perhaps we can agree to let this particular puppy sleep. By the way, did you know Miller, Henry Miller that is, not Arthur Miller, revered American novelist that he was and is, never received an invitation to the White House? Why not? He wrote with words too many highly placed hypocrites considered crude, salacious, explicit, taboo, too graphic, words that spoke without shame or embarrassment about sex. An interesting aside. Nearly 10 years before the United States Supreme Court overturned by a 5-4 vote the ban by the Florida Supreme Court and made Miller a household name, the Japanese courts had ruled his literature as art and not pornographic. I'm reminded at this time of the mongoose, seldom mentioned even by English lit professors, and which Walcott, tongue firmly planted in his cheek, no doubt, introduced to a largely Jamaican audience as a nasty poem. Its target is V.S. Naipaul, who the poet informed us doesn't like black men, but he loves black cunt. Your guess is as good as mine when it comes to your guess is as good as mine when it comes to why the most distinguished literateurs seem obsessed with the C word. If you're hoping to lay hands on the mongoose, at any rate, an uncensored rendering, I can only say good luck with that. As for the several journalists at the 2008 Calabash Literary Festival, few included in their dispatches what Walcott had revealed about Naipaul's darker side. Then there was the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Earl Butz. When he was asked during a private conversation aboard a commercial flight why the party of Abraham Lincoln could not attract black voters, in the presence of entertainers Cher, Sonny Bono, and Goody Goody Two Shoes, how many people know, um, well, Goody Goody Two Shoes, Pat Boone? How many people here have ever heard the name Pat Boone? Pat Boone was one of those lover boy, goody boys in white shoes and sang all those. That didn't make you feel old. Two hands went up. Pat Boone. You guys, you guys have a way. You guys have a way of making even us old guys feel decrepit. Anyway, I just want to go back. When he was asked during a private conversation aboard a commercial flight why the party of Abraham Lincoln could not attract black voters, in the presence of entertainers Cher, Sonny Bono, and Goody Two Shoes Pat Boone, Butts offered an opinion that was overheard by Nixon's former House counsel, John Dean of Watergate fame. Watergate? No safekeeper of secrets was Dean. He was covering the Republican National Convention for Rolling Stone. The private conversation was soon in the public domain, sugared to taste. A sample of the serving by the New York Times, of all newspapers. All the coloreds want are three things: satisfying sex, loose shoes, and a warm bathroom. Only Rolling Stone reported the exact words spoken by Butts. And I quote those words. All the coloreds want is a tight pussy, loose shoes, and a warm place to shit. In the, in the NAACP-led furor that followed, Butts was labeled a racist and fired. No mention of his potty mouth. Rolling Stone, on the other hand, was widely congratulated for telling it like it is. This story reminds me of Norman Mailer's favorite review of a book by James Baldwin. Jimmy is an excellent writer, if only he would quit trying to perfume shit, which has its own integrity and should stink on the page and elsewhere. Centuries from now, Norman Mailer noted from another perch, moral intelligence of another time may look in horror on the history of implanted 20th century people by way of newsprint. He would doubt that. Language does not always have to wear a suit and tie and laced up shoes. So I went through all of that embarrassing talking about sex to you because, of course, St. Lucians don't know about sex. You know, they don't know. There are no gays in St. Lucia. We just, you know. I gave you all of those things to illustrate to you the hypocrisy that a lot of us live with. Language does not always have to wear a suit and tie and laced up shoes, as Derek Walcott showed us with Mongoose. The object of a story is not grammatical correctness, but to make the reader welcome and to tell him a story to make him forget whenever possible that he's reading a story at all. Writing is refined thinking. Writing is seduction. And good talk is part of seduction. So saith the master spinner of horror stories, Stephen King. Let's return now to Arthur Miller's memorable short stint on the Rock of Sages, courtesy Derek Walker. Before inviting his guest on stage, the host delivered a hardly unexpected, riveting introduction. At the end of the evening, when nearly everyone had vacated the venue, many of them further to discuss how frail was the 90-something Miller and how delectable his 30-something female assistant. I refer particularly to leading male members of St. Lucia's intelligentsia. I approached the host. Can I please have your speech for publication? Oh, sure, he said, and returned to whatever he was doing that I had interrupted. Some 30 minutes later, when it seemed he'd forgotten about me, I approached him a second time. You want it now, he asked? Like this minute? His tone suggested heart-stopping incredulity. I said I hoped to publish his speech in the next day's Star. He chuckled. Are you crazy? You kidding me? You expect me to give this to you? He waved at shoulder height several pages of handwritten notes. You really want to publish this rubbish? Sure, you can have it after I've polished it. I never ran the speech. How could I when I never received it? And yes, I admit I was more than a little peeved. Until it occurred to me that Walcott's public image demanded around-the-clock protection. It was one thing to sit with friends discussing over Heineken's what we'd taken away from the remembered evening with Miller, what we understood Walcott to have said. But reading the relatively raw words of a renowned god of literature was altogether something else. So much for those who may have taken Reader's Digest at its word. That writing isn't all that difficult. All you need to do is write the way you speak. Writing has always been, for me, similar to competitive bodybuilding. Both demand Spartan discipline. Both demand laser focus. Both demand you eschew junk food. For the same reasons a Mr. Universe aspirant would avoid daily servings of pepperoni pizzas washed down with glasses of beer, so an ambitious student of writing must read only the best writers, regardless of genre, whether or not of his own time. As with competitive bodybuilding, of which I know a thing or two, the writing process demands you stick to your set schedules till death do you part. Also, that you be your toughest critic. Never permit yourself to go easy on the fledgling writer in your soul. Writing demands dedication. It demands tunnel vision commitment. Get used to writing, rewriting, rewriting, and rewriting. A reliable source assured me my favorite author habitually produced between 100 and 150 drafts before passing on manuscripts to his editors. Truman Capote famously continued to rewrite copies of his published works long after they had become bestsellers. By his own account, he wanted to see how effectively he could condense a 50-line paragraph into one half that number. I started out hoping one day to be a journalist, not to be confused with mundane who, what, where, when reporting. Both genres require that facts are faithfully reproduced. But it's always been as important for me that my readers feel what I felt while covering a story. My objective is to teleport my readers to the scene of the crime, so to speak, to step with me in the muck and grime, to experience what I had experienced, whether the overwhelming pain I endured at the scene of a fire that took the lives of 3 innocent children while their devastated mother prayed for a miracle, or my exhilaration at a James Taylor concert, or the palpable tension in the courtroom minutes before a jury delivered a life or death verdict. I want to take control of my reader's senses so that his eyes, his nose, his heart, and blood belong to me. There's a passage from Tom Wolfe's once highly controversial 1973 anthology of the New Journalism, wherein Gator Leach recalls how some hoity-toity Mencken era reviewers had sought to ridicule his published recollection of a mafia assassination. Talise had written about the moribund victim's last thoughts, and this is what, and this is, and this it was that had moved his trigger-happy detractors to reach for their vitriol spray guns. How could Talise possibly know what's on a dying man's mind? The determined who, what, when old school reporters guffawed. Obvious hyperbole. The writer's pushback was simple. Talise knows because Talise asked. Readers of Honor Thy Father are free to speculate. Did Talise write truth, or did he invent details of an assassination he allegedly witnessed? For certain, dead men tell no tales, neither expired mafiosi. For me, words of themselves are meaningless without context. Words are neither harsh nor flattering. Who decides whether a word is appropriate? Who do you think? I should mention at this point that the prospector for words must know what he's looking for and where to look. What are the best tools for the job? Keep in mind, dictionaries are not all created equal. In all events, dictionaries work best supported by thesauruses, synonym finders, reference sources, and so on. Yes, I sometimes refer to Google. But never as frequently as I turn to Strunk and White's The Elements of Style, known universally as the writer's Bible. Anybody who is interested in writing, whether to write nicer love letters, whatever, every writer of worth knows this book. And there have been so many reprints. I think I must have on my shelf at least 3 copies. Elements of Style. He also has Elements of Grammar, but this is the one that's universally famous. I remember picking up my usual 2 copies of Walcott's latest publication, in this case, What the Twilight Says, from a local bookstore. How many of you still remember what a bookstore is? For the especially young and modern among you, a bookstore is like a supermarket. Only one exists for purposes of the body, the other for the mind. As I say, I habitually purchase 2 copies of every Walcott nonfiction, one to further decorate my library, the other to be used as a textbook, a research tool to be desecrated by my presumptuous notations, highlighted in rainbow colors. I had read only the first page of a particular essay from Twilight when I put down the book to call my friend author. Boy, how I miss our tete-a-tetes. I informed him that I always purchase 2 copies of his latest nonfiction. I explained why, and then I said, "Do you have any idea why I read your books over and over and over, slowly?" He feigned consuming interest. I prattled away for several minutes just to say I read him for inspiration. He said, "Oh, that's so kind. Thank you, Rick." And I said, "But I've just started reading The Garden Path, and already I feel so damn depressed." I babbled some more about his universally acknowledged way with words, how reading them made me feel so damn inadequate, that I was wasting my time trying to be what obviously I was never cut out to be. He roared, and then he said, "Do you have the smallest hint of what it takes out of me?" As I tried to construct that ever elusive perfect sentence. "How many drafts?" He paused. "How I bleed?" There it was again, from God's lips to my grateful ears. Writing is rewriting, rewriting, and rewriting again. Whether you're a Nobel winner for literature, whether you are, well, non-entity esquire. I'm never shy about asking what I consider the important questions, whether of a reputed abstemious church leader, a condoned big shot pedophile, a rape victim. In my time as a working journalist in St. Lucia, I've grilled celibate clergymen that somehow fathered babies. Also, prime ministers who held themselves accountable to no one. Feared prime ministers. Drug barons, too. And far too often, I've had to return rape victims to the scene of their unspeakable violation. It might interest you to know the rape victims I interviewed had one thing in common: a clear remembrance of their abuser's body odor. They carry their rapist smell with them everywhere, to church, to the workplace, to bed. And in case you're wondering how Rick Wayne uncovered such revelations, remember Gate Alice. Rick Wayne asked the victims. They trusted me. It's never been a secret how I feel about rapists. I've never come away from an interview without having learned something new. There we go. Generational. Bear with me. Often I've headed out to cover one story, only to later find myself writing something altogether different, disconnected even, something bigger. I once covered a political rally during which the day's prime minister offered an excuse for failing to deliver on a particular promise. What he said was enough to warrant further investigation that precipitated an unenvisaged controversial resignation of a cabinet colleague. A writer learns something new every day, or should, if only he can summon the courage to ask questions. And that goes not only for writers. It's a good idea to thoroughly research your subjects in advance of interviews, especially when the subject is a politician. It serves to have a good idea of what his answer is likely to be. And just in case you're wondering, I have never felt the slightest reluctance to ask a question. Of course, time and place are always to be considered. Capote said the quality of his fiction rose several levels above after he covered the 1959 murder of a wealthy family in Holcomb, Kansas. The Clutter's killing is at the heart of Capote's 1966 so-called non-fiction novel, In Cold Blood. He said the opportunity afforded him a close-up view of life as he had never known or imagined it. Consider the movies about outer space before and following the moon landing. Think about that. After all those crazy years working as a journalist here, I think I understand what Capote meant. My star archives are there to remind me of the horrors, the celebrations, the promises by politicians kept and unkept, the wickedness of man, poverty so commonplace as to be considered normal by its worst victims. All of that I've witnessed and photographed in my 40-something years of practicing my brand of journalism in this alleged paradise. This mad, mad, mad Disney world, where the workers insist on their right to ride the motionless rides while paying customers stare in wonderment at the unscheduled spectacle. In her collection of essays entitled Reporting, Lillian Ross states, every reporter must write in his own way, speak with his own voice, find his individual style. So there is no reason for one writer to lecture another on how to do his work. There is no how that can be passed along, because the how of each writer's work resides somewhere deep in the fabric of that writer's being. I could not agree more. There were many who thought I deserved prison after I published a report of a rape trial in 1990. What concerned the president of the Dysfunctional Crisis Center had little to do with the actual abuse of a mentally handicapped young girl while in the care of her aunt and her live-in lover, a police officer. The crisis center official wanted me to put away for writing detailed accounts of the rape trial, not of the rape, of the rape trial, as opposed to the usual 5 lines afforded sexual offenses before my arrival in this bastion of Christianity. You notice how rape victims, I used to say, I still say, when I get the opportunity, that if I know 100 women in St. Lucia, and as I say, I know people as only Rick Wynn knows them. If I know 100 women in St. Lucia, at least 80 have been sexually abused, raped by relatives, incestuous. 80% of women I know, and they have trusted me with that. And, well, we'll come back to that. And I notice there's no what? 80? No sound of exaggeration? Because you know it's true. And we wonder why our people are so effed up. We don't hear anyone talking about the darker aspects of incest. Women are an incredible species. How you can live with that has always been beyond my comprehension, way beyond. Women are special, and I say that not in the way these days women have rights, and I'm not into that. I am into the superiority of women as a species. Superiority, not because they're stronger or whatever, because they have a kind of strength that a man can only not even dream of. He cannot imagine it. He cannot imagine it. Little children raped by fathers, and so on and so on. And all of you women sitting there have experienced it in one form or another. And I say every woman sitting here, by a husband, by a brother, in the worst ways, and you carry it with you. I'm almost getting off track because that is always, and when the politicians and the goody activists, that is not what they talk about when they talk about women. They talk about empowering women, giving them a job. Well, you're giving a job to a screwed up human being, a person who was one thing one day and becomes something totally different and would never be the same again. When a woman has been raped, she has been killed, murdered. She will never again exist as she did before the rape. On that note, I get carried with that one. The crisis center official, and I go back again, pardon me, before walking became impossible, I would visit Margot, and while scanning old newspapers for whatever, I would now and again come across a rape case. 5 lines somewhere in the back page. A rape case. 5 lines. The crisis center official wanted me put away for writing detailed accounts of the rape trial, as opposed to the usual 5 lines afforded sexual offenses before my arrival in this bastion of Christianity. On the remembered occasion, I had presented the trial as my lead. Making matters worse was my throat-grabbing, calculated headline, gun in hand, penis and vagina. And under that, in smaller type, Susie gets her man. And there are those in this room who may well remember that because it is unforgettable. Scores of letters published by the Star's competitors demanded the day's DPP order my incarceration as a warning to young reporters likely to follow my example. But then the words complained of had dropped from the untainted lips of the DPP herself, Susie Dovan. While wrapping up a presentation, she had said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what we have here is a matter of gun in hand, penis in vagina." So there. And now you're probably measuring mentally what Susie said at the remembered trial against the regular droppings from the mouths of our largely inarticulate parliamentarians during House debates and at every other opportunity. Yes, indeed, we've come a long way in reverse. But then, who am I to moralize? That I will leave to others more qualified. I should warn aspirants, nevertheless, that writing is not for the faint of heart, especially in this jungle. You will need a hide thick as a hippo's if you hope to survive local critics. In this simply beautiful country of ours, the quality of a writer's work depends almost exclusively on what he reveals about his reader, or about his reader's friends, his reader's relatives, his reader's enemies. Regardless of how obviously talentless the reporter, some people will consider him worthy of the Nobel if he should flatter them and their horrid herd, and deserving of the worst epithets if he should write honestly about a talented individual they just happen to despise. It will serve newcomers to keep in mind that truth by itself can be meaningless, if not immediately verifiable, which is why writers must read, especially our libel laws. Why writers must love research as if their life depended on it, because it does. Keep in mind, reading is the creative center of a writer's life. I share with my books every room in my house, including bathrooms. I carry via my phone some of my favorite uncommon words and their shades of meaning, as well as sayings by my favorite wise men and women. I especially like when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in society. Over time, they make new laws that justify it, and a moral code where they make the laws to authorize it, and a moral code to justify it. I read it properly. When plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in society, over time, they make for themselves laws that authorize it and a code of conduct that justifies it. That's by Frederick Bastiat. I end now with another reminder from my cell phone. Its author, an Italian journalist who died a little over 10 years ago. Her name was Oriana Fallaci. She said, "A journalist lives history in the best of ways. That is, in the moment that history takes place. He lives history. He touches history with his hands, looks at history with his eyes, he listens to it with his ears." And now, I return to the esteemed son of the soil for whom this library is named, Hunter J. Francois. So, or maybe I should ask a couple of questions before I proceed. Hunter Francois says Rick Wayne writes without love, and in that way, he typifies the politician, at least the politician in the setting he presents. When I first read that, and I was I was 1979, and like I told you, Hunter and I were not exactly the best of friends at the time, and I understood it too quickly, and I and I thought, oh God, Francois is having a real shot at me, making me one of those guys, but he wasn't. But if you were here now, or maybe you can do it, I would have asked him to explain what he meant by Rick Wayne writes without that admittedly rare commodity, love. Does anybody want to take a shot that you think I write with love, or somebody should write with love? Or, that love? Does that suggest love? Okay. Are you a writer? Are you a writer? I'm sorry if I didn't know, but I knew I was talking to a writer right away. Didn't you, Mark? Couldn't you tell by that? The, only a writer is going to say unvarnished truth.
Maybe he reads a little.
But it's so on the ball. It's actually, it's that's I use the line myself because I can't think of anything else to say. Unvarnished truth. You were going to say something else?
Well, earlier you asked, what do we know about Hunter
What was?
Francois?
The
Can you
air's
hear me?
getting old. Well, I'm there too.
You can hear? Okay. And I couldn't help remember what I heard that gentleman say in the 1970s, 79, around
Who?
there.
Hunter?
Yes, him. In a rum shop. Yes, a rum shop. That would be, what's the guy's name? In Brantford's rum shop.
Are you Margot's husband?
Pardon? Sorry, I
You
don't know.
naughty girl, Margot.
Oh, yes, yes.
Can you imagine? Go ahead.
Yeah. So, and this is what I heard the guy say. And I was, I'm new as a politician, and they talk about the Malawi and the poor and what have you and so on. They're the champions trying to help them. As you say, give them jobs and what have you. And there he was in that rum shop at the counter, and he said, the working class,
Can kiss my ass.
I have
I've
my
got the
pension
working-
bill
I've
at
got
last.
the working
I
man.
said,
I've got
oh,
the job. What's it? I've got the.
I've got my pension bill at last. I think
That,
it's around that.
there's another version.
Pardon?
There's another version from
But
Hunter.
that's what I heard
The
him say.
working class can kiss my ass. I've got the foreman's job at last.
Yeah, probably that's the original stuff. But he said,
But-
I've got the
well, you're
pension
right.
bill.
Yeah.
Because around that time, I think Compton was passing this bill for politicians
Yeah.
to get pension. So,
But anybody else? I wanted. Don, you want to take a shot at what do you think he meant by Rick Wainwright's Without Love? Let Miss French have it.
Hello, hello.
Oh, we have a student. Oh,
Hey, I'm that short. Okay. So, I'm assuming what he meant by you didn't write with love was that you didn't
I
write.
have a lousy ears.
I'm assuming that what he meant by you didn't write with love was that you didn't write with favoritism or a bias or some sort of ease towards the person you were criticizing. But in my opinion, I think that you did write with a certain love for transparency, honesty, instead of just choosing one side to be more honest with and be like, but we'll leave that out since I care about this person in particular. So I think there was love in the book, just not romanticized love, if that makes sense.
You know, yesterday evening, yesterday evening, I was talking to Nicole. Nicole is associated with the Star. I think I've known her since she was 18. And Lyra was another right hand of mine at the Star. But I was saying last night to Nicole that usually I'm very depressed, especially when everything you read is ignorant politics. Not I love politics, not ignorant politics. And the ignorant politics comes out of ignorant people. That's the part that gets me. It's not the ignorant politics that bothers me. It's where it's coming from. It's coming from St. Lucian people, St. Lucian minds. So the trash, ignorance, illiteracy, gibberish, Vienna talk, it's coming from people. So I'm less concerned about the politics itself and nasty politics because there ain't no such thing as politics being nasty. It's nasty people. And the more we enlarge on that audience, the deeper St. Lucia sinks in the toilet. You know, St. Lucia is just a rock. I call it the rock of sages. You must have heard me. The rock of sages. But it's a rock. And it's we, the people, who determine whether St. Lucia is future or not. All of that to say that I was saying to Nicole yesterday evening, that I'm kind of ambivalent about how I feel about St. Lucia's future. And you don't know and I said to her, I think St. Lucia is still salvageable, but it'll take the young people to do that, or totally different mindset and so on. We had a little talk on that last night. And this young lady, there's the evidence right there. It ain't all gone. There's the evidence right there. We should put that question, and so different. And notice even Kendall applauded that. Kendall applauded that. So we're not lost. And I'm a little disappointed that so few of you want to be writers, because a country without writers is doomed. Because a country of writers is likely going to be a country without readers as well. So all you're getting is the echo chamber of stupidity going around and around. Okay, so Don, you were going to give me a shot at that thing? Pardon me?
I think it's angry writing.
Hunter?
No, what Hunter is describing about your writing.
Oh.
Not only then, but since and up to now. I mean, just listen to how you're talking there. A lot of things, and I say angry, maybe angry.
I understand.
Right? But you're upset about a lot of things, and it comes out in the writing. It's angry writing. That's what I'm thinking he's describing.
That too, I appreciate that. I very much appreciate that, coming from another writer as well. Because could there be such a thing as subconscious anger? Yeah. I think that's probably how I would do it, because especially when I was writing It'll Be Right in the Morning, I was very, very angry. By the way, this is the first edition hardcover of it. I don't know how many there are, and you can see how battered it is. We have other editions. We printed it about how many times, Leo, you would know, etc. But quite correct, angry. And I don't know that I've ever lost that. I'm still very, very angry, because still very angry. I'll come to you in a second. When I think of, I came here in whatever year it was, 87, on the trip. Yeah, I settled. I settled in 87 from the States, and St. Lucia really looked like we had something going in 1997. It really looked like we had something going. I will never forget being on a platform with Kenny Anthony and seeing like all of St. Lucia was there. You know, they called it the Sea of Red. Everybody was there in red shirts and had you experienced that, Don? Oh, red, you know, and I couldn't care about the red shirts thing one way or the other. What it seemed to me is like finally St. Lucians had come together, all that stuff. We have to unite. We have united. We couldn't be any more united than we were in 1997. And we have never been as hateful of one another as we are today and growing more hateful. We have failed. We have failed miserably the young people of this country. People like this young lady who just spoke there, they will make it, but we've made it so much harder for them, so much harder. And I go back to how disappointed I am that Calix George was also disappointed in you guys, by the way. So I too am disappointed that you don't read, you don't even want to be a writer. So when Calix George said the trouble he had researching for his book, I went through the same with when I was doing it right in the morning to get the introduction to the book and all to get me things right. You know, I, I don't fall. There's a book. It's a good little book, and I don't want to say something too bad about them. That's me anyway. What the hell? It'll be a plug no matter how you look at it. Yeah, I still won't mention it. There's a little book called The History of St. Lucia, a book by yeah, it's one of the bestsellers in St. Lucia by tourists. Tourists buy it. One of the, and yeah, and it's written, but it's written by Guy Ellis, who, by the way, is responsible for me being in writing. But that's for another show. I hope it's hopefully that God, I ain't got too many years left, and I hope you guys will be smart enough to bring the likes of me, Kendall, back here to talk because we ought to, and to question us, not just to hear us talk, preach at you, but to question us, you know. So, was somebody going to say something? No? So, I don't know what it is like to write with love. I don't even know what that means. And yes, I was angry, but not consciously angry of this. And then I did Foolish Virgins, which really was based on demystifying a con, because the center of Foolish Virgins is independence. That's the greatest con that's ever been pulled on St. Lucians. St. Lucians have never been independent. St. Lucians will never be independent. St. Lucia has never been self-sustaining, never. St. Lucia has always survived, to quote Tennessee Williams, from the generosity of strangers. Is that Cletus Springer? Hi, Cletus. St. Lucia will never, St. Lucia has never sustained itself. St. Lucia has always survived thanks to the generosity of strangers. And ironically, the strangers we profess to hate. So while we profess to hate them, please give me a bread. Please do this for me. Please, the only books here in school are all done out there. You know, it really is very, very sad. And perhaps saddest of all is that we don't have enough of these kind of things. And when they do have, I watch them on Facebook or on television. You have the guy comes on, Adrian O'Shea comes on, or Kendall says some powerful stuff there. And then I read the things on Facebook. Oh, I love Kendall. He was a good teacher. He was my great teacher. A wonderful thing by it. So nothing about the quality of, not the quality, the essence of what he said, to challenge what he said, to ask him further explanation of what he said. We don't care because we don't read. Our minds don't work that way. We don't want to ask questions. And I underscored in my piece, my opening thing, the matter of questioning. When I first found out this thing about the rape victim and the odor, it was volunteered. Somebody, gave me that. And then after that, I would ask other rape victims I interviewed, and they all said the same thing. And I found they talked as openly to me because I make no bones about how I feel about rape. And I ain't no moralist on what, everybody knows I'm a devil. But this devil ain't going around no rape. I think it's about the worst thing anybody can do to anybody. And guys get raped too. Nobody talks about that. It happens. But we need to be able to talk about that. I opened up with all those sexual things deliberately. I use those words, and those words I used there were calculated. Calculated. The hypocrisy we have, we don't want to say a word, but we're busy saying it on Facebook. You cannot have a discussion on Facebook, a debate on Facebook, and wait a minute, it's another bomb comment, Kukun this and kukun that. That's normal talk on Facebook now. And there is no, am I right or wrong? And there is nobody, none of the writers, the activists, nobody standing out there and saying this is disgusting. Instead, we have prayers. We must pray. When are we going to understand that God has either there's no God, either God was dead, or God turned you off. He shut the door on you. You're not worth listening to. One or the other, because with all the prayers that have been going on, St. Lucia continues to grow worse. And all the guys who are doing things, the frontliners and whatever, they are now almost gone. And I don't see anybody replacing. I don't see all the guys who have been doing things. And they were doing those things from young. It's not a matter of they suddenly got old and they were doing that. Not true. Find out how long Kendall's been writing. Find out how long Mac has been writing. Find out how long any others. From young. Even our politicians, I keep hearing, what we want in the house is some young people, young stupid people. And in any event, wasn't Kenny Anthony young when he came into the house? Wasn't John Compton? Wasn't Stephenson King? They were all young. And they grew old, killing the country, all of them. I cannot have a talk without talking politics, because politics is all St. Lucia is about.
We know that we do not teach our children to read for pleasure, because that is now gone. After Form 3, if you don't want to do literature anymore, you don't have to. So reading is no longer something that we do for pleasure. So we know what our country lacks. What is the solution for the problem? How is it that we inspire our young people to want to be writers? How do we inspire our young people to want to read for pleasure?
I think to a degree, the writers are responsible. There are very few people who do what I do with my kind of personality. I almost come out there with a cutlass, and I don't have time for little soft, sweetie words. I want, when you read me, to be angry, to be pissed off at me, or to laugh your head off, or to be sad, or to feel sorry for yourself. I don't want people just read me and go to sleep for pleasure. I don't want to be read for pleasure. Okay? Why not? I said, no, I'm trying to make a point to you. I don't know we can afford to write just for pleasure, to read some kind of hokey-pokey love story fantasy. That's right. I suppose that's reading for pleasure, No, I'm saying to you that different people may well have their notion of what reading for pleasure is. But reading for pleasure is me reading about Norman Mailer participating in a march on the Pentagon, and then coming out and tell you his fears and whatever, and I'm strengthened by that. All the things I write about are real. Derek Walker paid me a great compliment. Derek says to me, we might not be around, but the time will come when the only representative of St. Lucia's history, contemporary history, would be your books. Because I wrote them as articles as they happened, the history, as Lillian Ross says. I wrote the history as it happened. I saw it, I touched it with my hands, and saw it with my eyes, and heard it with my ears. And so there are long newspaper articles with stories, and all the people I wrote about were in the prime of their time, radical as hell, and not a one has stood up and disputed out of court or in court any of the things I wrote. And I wrote some pretty tough stuff that Hunter Francois says is writing without love. But it was complimentary, I think.
Have to be about nonsense and fairy tales. So for
In other words,
example,
what you're asking me is how to get them sufficiently interested in children. Well, I can only speak from my perspective, and that's always the best you have. When I was a little boy in Library, and that sounds romantic, Kendall will like that. You know, big eucalyptus tree outside the schoolyard, big, huge, in Library, eucalyptus tree. Do we still have those things there, eucalyptus trees? At Library, and there was a guy called a Louis. His name was Edward Louis, Louis family. And on Tuesdays, right after lunch, school started after lunch, it would be time to read to us. And when you think of recording, of all books, scripture, the books are the scripture, but written like normal storytelling. And so that's Daniel and the Lion's Den became for me an adventure. You know, I was not interested in miracles, and it was so simple writing and so on. So that I looked forward to reading those books. I was 11 years old. I was interested in reading those books. So what would happen if you got a book like that? A good thing would be to find out what your kids are interested in. You can soon find out what they're interested in just by listening to them, talking to them, or whatever. And then you get some of those books, and you all sit together, and you read those stories, and they don't know what you're doing, but you're reading them and entertaining them, and making them see how great it is to read books. That might be one way to do it, because that's how I did it. When I was about 8 years old, my family was not any kind of literary family, regular folk. My father was a mechanic. And I remember I can see it, visualize it right now. On our wall was a little bookshelf that maybe it could take about 20 books, but there were about 2 books and a whole bunch of mechanic stuff on there. And I remember 2 books that were there. One, a thick red-covered book that was a grammar book, and I won't go into what it says, but I learned from it. That was so important. But I remember another book. It was a book of horoscopes, a big book. And it talked about my birthday, my whatever you call them, horoscope. And I was 8, and I remember to this day, because of the words, should guard, I should have taken some of that advice though, should guard against the baleful influence of the most fascinating types of the opposite sex. That my horoscope should guard against the baleful influence of the more fascinating types of the opposite sex. I remember it because of the words. All it means is I should avoid hot women. But the words got me here. Okay, so I want to read another. How much time do we have?
Maybe
We already over time?
not yet. Maybe just about 20 minutes. But you started to engage the audience. So there's somebody else who wants to engage you before you read your last part.
What is that?
And Mrs. Modeste wants to engage you.
I'm sorry. There are no speakers here.
You started the engagement. So you have one more person who wants to engage you before you go into your.
How much time do I have all told?
Just about 20 minutes. What time is it? Is it like 3 o'clock already? Okay.
I'm all right?
2:39? Yes. About 20 minutes for us to
I'm
wrap up
doing
about
okay?
3. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, everyone. I've been holding this thing for a long, long time.
It's on. Let us speak into it.
Okay. I've been holding this thing for a long, long time. Once I heard that Rick Wayne was coming here, a number of thoughts came to my mind. I spoke with someone who is here just before I got here. And I have been saying, and I said only yesterday, don't be afraid to speak in public because nobody is superior to you. So don't be afraid of people. I've been holding that and I will speak. Let me say to all of you young people, whatever you believe in, whatever you think you believe in, and whatever you think you stand for, ask yourself very seriously whether you really stand for it so that way down the line you will say, yes, I did, and I'm not sorry that I did at the time. Because these days, we hear many people on TV saying, Pamwea, me see, I wasn't there, you know. John Compton was such a great man. There are those who are trying to overturn his car the night of the Plywood City. And they will tell you, no, not me, I wasn't there. So whatever you say you believe in now. Don't do it because you're following the fool multitude. Don't do it because everybody else is doing it. Do it because you believe it. I want to tell you about Rick Wayne. I'm probably, maybe after him, I'm the oldest here. I remember vividly, I can see it in my mind's eyes. I was on St. Louis Street, and there was this man wearing a black and white shirt, going down the road, swaggering.
No more,
And,
no more.
and somebody said, look at this man going down the road. He is brother to so-and-so at our school, Ave Maria School. He wants to be a movie star, and his name will be Ricky Wayne. I remember that. He came close enough to being a movie star. He told us he pushed, he struggled, he did what he could to achieve. He's proud of what he has achieved, and I guess we are too, because you said, raise your hands for him. The next thing I heard, he was back in St. Lucia. He was singing something, in my imagination. Next thing, a few years after that, I saw this man. The name was not Rick Wayne. It was Larry Carrasco, wearing striped trunks, a straw hat, in a magazine, Zodiac. The man was from the Bahamas. In those days, St. Lucia was Lapo, so that's fine. He has come back here. I said he has achieved. Ladies and gentlemen, he's a powerful man. He's a powerful writer. He's a skillful writer. He earns his keep. He doesn't have to ask anybody for a job. He's not afraid of anybody. He speaks his mind. Somebody says he speaks with anger. I would say he writes with derision. He laughs at us. He mocks us. He says things like somebody said in library, the man don't write no book. When he left and he went out there to become a movie star, people were saying that then he's back here, and sometimes when I listen to him on TV, I hold my head. I say, Lord, what have we done to deserve that? Because not every single person is a hypocrite. He's a motivational speaker. Not every single person has no gonads. It is what he injects into the society very often. I listen, I say, no, not good for us. Not good for us. Only 238 square miles. People go to America and they say, I don't like Brooklyn. I can't stand Brooklyn. But up in Texas, in the countryside, I like there. Some people say, I love upstate New York. But we are only, when the giant puts his foot on the lily bush, as they call him, all is gone. When this thing happens in this little country, I told you I'm old, I want some water. When what he injects in this little 238 square miles is not good for us. Very often it is not good for us. I remember him talking to a lady, a member of staff at Sir Arthur. Fortunately, at least 3 members of staff called and said, no, you don't know the lady, you don't know her purpose. You cannot do that. You cannot have that, my lady, talk in this vein on television, not good for us. As I said, America, England, those are big countries. You have this party, that party. But when you do it here, not good for us. We are asking, when did we get so? When did we become so cruel? When you listen to some of the crimes that are committed, we are injecting too much I am not talking about being hypocritical. I'm not saying don't talk sex. I teach Chaucer, D.H. Lawrence, whom I love, Shakespeare sometimes, all of them discuss sex. The biology teacher once asked me, how come when you all have tutorials, you all talk about sex? I'm no prude, but I cannot forgive Rick Wayne for writing. First front cover. What? Gun in hand, penis in vagina, Susie gets her man. That can't be right. That can't be good. 238 square miles, a little handful of people. Very sensational, not good for us. He's cynical, one might say. So is Naipaul, but I have defended Naipaul in class. I have said, let us look at ourselves and let us admit to our faults and see if we can do something about it. It's not that I'm saying let's hide, let's admit to our faults, but to have a powerful person on a powerful organ, which is a television, mocking us and telling us we are stupid. And people don't do things, the whole mass of us don't do things right, people in authority, that's not good for us. It's not good for us.
Mrs. Modest,
Thank you very
let
much.
me give Rick an opportunity to respond. This is precisely what an academic setting should be about. So thank you for that contribution, because I know he can hold his own and respond to that.
You see, you don't have speakers here, and so it's very difficult. But if you, I heard her say something about Naipaul and penis gun in hand. She's defended him. Oh, yeah. What was the penis and vagina bit? It's not good for the country. Let me make sure I get that right. That she considered it negative to carry that headline. All right. Um, you're not alone. You're not alone. A lot of people are into that kind of hypocrisy with words as opposed to looking at the message. They think a word is bad. And what I was describing actually was a horror of a little handicapped girl in the care of her aunt and a police officer, and they had horribly abused her. I thought maybe you might have said something about that and say perhaps it was a little sensational, the headline. But what offended you was the actual reproduction of what was said in a courthouse by the DPP. I merely quoted the words of the DPP in a public courthouse. But most of all, I wanted to grab you by your pants and shake you and say, look, get out of your flipping cocoon and understand you have little children handicapped getting raped and you're busy putting it in 5 sweetie lines in the back of a paper. I wanted to throw it up in your face like vomit so that you can resist it and you can fight against rape of anybody, let alone little children, by police officers. Don't take my time.
Are you angry?
Pardon?
Are you angry? Because the anger that you have, does it just stem from a passion for change that you want to see and you haven't seen? Does it stem from, things that can happen and it's not happening? Or you just trying to make people wake up to the reality of what really is and not the sugarcoating nice kind of, to behind the scenes. Make them see really what's happening behind the scenes and not the nice
Let
kind of
me
thing.
make one thing absolutely clear. I am also angry with myself. I remember lying on a beach in California, Los Angeles, a place called Venice Beach. where all the bodybuilders hang out, Gold's Gym, and I was at the height of my stuff. I can't even rest. Autographs and all that kind of. I'm lying down on the beach, loads of sand, beautiful, and the water looks uh, clean and everything because they have trucks coming up and cleaning every half hour and whatever. And I was lying there and I was thinking, it may be bigger. They may have the trucks, but none of that touches St. Louis. I can't wait to go back to St. Louis for good. And in my mind, I was thinking about lying at Pigeon Point, lying at VG, where I used to wrestle with the guys, and we spent a whole Sunday. Fantasy stuff. Today, it sounds like fantasy, but it was the norm. And I came back to it. I came back to that and watched it go. Watched it like the ocean coming in and washing in up to the cemetery. That's how the good things we have have allowed the waters, the evil waters, so to speak, to come and take them away and disappear. And we just stand like, you know. But I played my part in that too, in supporting politicians that I should not have supported. I like the banana thing, for example. That's why I'm able to write about the banana. All my stories are written from inside the belly of the beast. Okay? So that's why I don't have much time for the reporting from the desk. I was in there, always in the belly of the beast. People wondered how I could be so many places at one time. Anybody could call me up at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd be at my car and gone. I did my own photographs. And the same Kenny Anthony, everybody thinks that all I've done is criticize him. I have criticized him, deservedly so, because so much was expected. But that doesn't mean there's not another Kenny Anthony. There's also Kenny Anthony, the humane man. I've not had much opportunity to talk about that because nobody asked me about that. And some of the nicest things that have been said about my work, scholarly things that have been said about my work, was on video by Kenny Anthony. So you see, but I was in there joining and encouraging the strikes, the banana strikes, telling the people that was terrible and was stupid. When I was a man, when I was a child, I did the things of a child. Now I'm a man, I reflect. And they were stupid and they contributed to the thing. And so that's why I am angry. And that's why I try to reverse what's probably irreversible. And we still have, with due respect to the lady over there, at least she came to here, it shows you that people are more concerned with words, English words, not bothered about cocoon and whatnot on the Facebook as regular talk. That guy from but you'd be worried if I quote the director of public prosecution who wants the jury to feel what she's saying. What we have here with in this case is a case of gun in hand by a police officer and his penis in the child's vagina. There are no words I can use that would make this sound good. And furthermore, they're not my words. They are the reproduced words of the director of public prosecutions, who in her wisdom knew what she was doing when she used those words. And Susie Dovey, as everybody knows here, was a very kind of lady. Susie Dovey was not a question of language. Susie Dovey used those words for the effect she wanted, and she got him 14 years. But we still are more concerned, conveniently, because as I say, we ignore the Facebook stuff, we ignore the lives, they call them, etc. We ignore that. And we go about penis is a bad word. How can you write word penis? How can you write vagina? How can Derek Walcott say cunt? How can Naipaul say and so on, so on, so? We have to get out of that. The fact that I say cunt or I say other words, does that mean I don't read Kendall? Or I can't appreciate Mac? Or that I don't read Naipaul? I read everything, including the supposed expletives. And yes, I'm angry, but I'm also angry with my contribution to it. I try to make up for it. I want to read this. This one is very important to me. I call it the prominent people. Almost from the moment I started covering court trials in this town of one-trick ponies, I wondered about what might be going on in the minds of usually defenseless accused citizens while jaded magistrates and barely conscious defense lawyers performed their courtroom pantomimes. The man in the dock usually appears disconnected, seemingly unperturbed that the performance would end with him losing his freedom or his life. It had struck me that the majority of accused individuals shared a similar morphology: male, age 19 to 30, unemployed or unemployable, barely literate, destitute, mentally challenged, a nondescript resident of one of our ever proliferating ghettos. I had never covered a police case against a businessman, a school principal, a lawyer, a clergyman, a banker, or a politician. Never mind the widespread whispers about their curtained proclivities. For years, I had tried to understand the apparent indifference of most victims of the law. No more. I know now that what I had for so long taken for apathy, acedia, and torpor, among other afflictions, were actually the ever-changing faces of surrender, of resignation. It didn't matter all that much if a judge handed them over to the rope or to the prolonged other inhumanities of prison wardens with their own mental maladies. The man in the dock had never meant much to anyone, certainly not to the system's chief manipulators, whom our Prime Minister recently referred to as the prominent people. In the scheme of things, he was of no special significance. He owned nothing, therefore was nothing, a nonentity with neither push nor pull. He influenced nothing. He was just another lowercase in Derek Walker's alphabet of the emaciated. For 2 days this week, I sat in a courtroom waiting to learn whether I would be sent to prison for publishing what I truly believed was in the public interest, a response to published accounts of an incident I knew to be incorrect. I entered the courtroom with my father and son lawyers, took my seat, self-convinced the justice system would deliver a fair verdict, that it would confirm I had done nothing wrong, that I had delivered to my readers only what was expected of me, the truth as I had witnessed it, with malice toward none. As for the charge by the former police commissioner, Culprit Phillips, deceased, that I had set out to turn against him a jury not yet chosen, I can at this juncture say little. The judge had not yet delivered his verdict. But as the picture unfurled before me in court, as I took in the well-fed faces of observers observing St. Lucian justice in action, it had occurred to me they mostly belonged to the prominent people. And all at once I realized I was at the epicenter of a nightmare. At some time or another, I had cause to write about some of them in terms less than fawning, these pretend peacocks that carried on as if their bank balances and their pedigree rendered them special. I thought about the residents of Groseilliers and Vieux-Fort and Choiseul, as well as other communities barely a 2-hour drive from where the prominent people live in their air-conditioned comfort, while the sun savaged ordinary folk, men and women employed on banana plantations, children too, who seldom attended school, who lived with their pauperized mothers in hovels without running water, toilet facilities, and other basic amenities. Secretly angry, hungry old men and women who trimmed the grass lawns of the prominent people, or toiled in their kitchens, or took care of their privileged offspring while they accepted every gilt-edged invitation to party, whether in their ivory towers or at the official residences of the Prime Minister and the Governor General, and who, in most cases, received in return less than $300 a month. The prominent people were incumbent politicians and their well-heeled friends, disguised libidinous clergymen, vulturous captains of local commerce. In the best interest of the ordinary citizen, I had written critically of them for their public demonstrations of arrogance and self-importance, exposed their decorated clay feet to public examination, proved them to be under their various cassocks not nearly as holy as they pretended, and often I had ridiculed their preposterous posturings. On more than one occasion, I had dared to report about cover-ups involving celibate priests who had somehow impregnated young members of their flock, then washed away their sin in the blood of the Lamb. It had also occurred to me as I scanned the packed courtroom that few of the regular citizens, The deprived desperate had shown up. They preferred to phone in their good wishes to show me God was not asleep, that he would never let me down. Evidently, they had not yet learned that God was always on the side of the prominent people with the big battalions. And then there were Her Majesty's guests, among them Michael Gabu Alexander, whose trial on charges of attempted murder I had covered. He had received word that Cuthbert Phillips's lawyer had pleaded with the judge to afford me a tax-funded vacation at what a visiting British MP had unforgettably renamed the real dark hole of Calcutta. No problem, Gabu had assured me via a note delivered by a recently released marijuana smoker. Stand up. They can't break you. Let them send you to jail. We'll take care of you. You're going to be all right in the morning. Despite that he was facing a 15-year sentence canceled by a justice delaying appeal court after he had already served 4 years, Gabu retained his sense of humor. Now he was punning with the title of my first book about politics in St. Lucia. It'll be all right in the morning. Small comfort, of course. Even the legendary Kenneth Foster and his brilliant son Peter at my side, I could not shake the feeling that the behind-the-scenes operators of the system, the prominent people, were in control, that they would somehow find a way to take me down for the inconveniences I had caused them. Is this the demon thought that had rendered others less blessed, paralyzed in court, looking for all the world like one of Walcott's corpses scattered through a paradise? Am I scared? You bet I am. On the other hand, I continue to believe truth and justice are finally unconquerable. That despite losing an occasional round or two to the plantation's rulers and their accommodators, right will prevail. When I can no longer believe this, to quote Don McLean and Madonna, this will be the day that I die. This will be the day that I die.
That seemed a little lukewarm. What happened? You all were shocked at the singing, ladies and gentlemen. We said it was going to be fiery, and that it was. And I think the honesty that came out on both sides, the kind of discussion, we really welcome that here at the Arthur Lewis Community College. We have time for a few more questions. Mr. Modest, I see you. But let me just engage one person who sent a question on YouTube for an answer. And they're taking you back in time to your 30s. They want to know to his 30-year-old self.
Me at 30. Yeah.
So they said, if you were the Rick of 30 plus years ago in today's world, somebody in my thing just disappeared. Who has it on? On YouTube. It just went away for some strange reason. Bring me a phone or read out loud.
Okay, I want to.
Okay.
I think I got. I think I got it.
Yeah. You want to hear it again? Or you want to read it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you were the Rick of 30 plus years ago in today's world, would you still open the Star? And if you would, what would you do differently? Because passion alone cannot float a boat for long. I know the answer right away. I would still open the Star, but I would be 100 times more radical, more participating, more rabble-rousing, more getting young people to break down what is here right now, because what is here right now has to go. It has to go. And that's what I would do. That's what I would try to do. We've had so many, you think of, I'm going to call names. There isn't one political name you can think of who did not get into parliament exactly the same way at the expense of exactly the same people. George Odlum. Kenny had the easiest time, so easiest time. I was dinner served, Kenny. All the others, via the knee on the neck of the poorest, which is to say also the least literate of the country. The steps into parliament are the necks of the poorest of the poor, the encouraged ignorance, the complicity of the church, the complicity of writers, the complicity of teachers, the complicity of people who have minds in front of them that they mold but have to play ball to get by. And I recognize also that, those people who are just playing ball to get by, they have to eat. And I always say that there was never a time in St. Lucia when St. Lucia was self-sustaining. St. Lucia was always a beggar. Helen was always a beggar. Again, Nicole, she's the one I just threw those things at. I called a friend, old, we're all old now. Andrew I called a friend and I said to him, I remember a time you said boldly that the people who were supporting cable and wireless were house niggers, house slaves. And he laughed. I said, what are you going to, he said, you didn't like that then. I said, no, I didn't. And I didn't really know why I didn't like it. But I know now why I think it's stupid. Because I don't know how in a black country like ours, I think you know, I can't understand how in a black country like ours, all black, a black guy can look at another black guy and call him a house nigger or a house slave without realizing that he is telling the guy, we are both niggers and we are both slaves, only I have chosen to put on my, or fate has put on my forehead, field nigger, and on yours, house nigger. You cannot, as a black man, call another guy a house slave unless you are admitting yourself that you are a slave, only you are on the plantation. And by the way, anybody here in the situation of slavery, which it's hard to imagine, but we can try, has a chance to work cooking and scrubbing the floors and being in the field and getting you whipped on, which one are you going to choose? And if you chose to go and work in the house, something wrong with that, there ain't nothing wrong with that. Survival is everything. The only thing is you should try not to survive at the expense of the other. But that's very, very difficult. So if I was 30 again, I think you get an idea what I'm talking about. I tried in the past to be, it didn't work, to be as, there's no such thing as even-handed and there's no such thing as neutral. So when I decided in my time, and was old enough here to know it, I decided as a citizen, I thought Compton was bad for the country as a citizen. He had done his thing before my time, and I don't know about that. I still have a problem with headliners. I have a habit of dropping them, don't I? I still have a problem that the only statue we have in Constitution Park is that called the Father of the Nation. And in Father of the Nation is a message that is horrid. Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. Don't pretend you know what I'm talking about. And if you will, I'm not going to allow you to anyway. I remember Daniel Sinclair Daniel, the first Speaker of the House, sitting there on the 40th anniversary of John Compton as a parliamentarian, packed, and all the Glaglan people, all the necklaces and everything, and there, all handpicked. They want to be seen there. And by the way, I hope you caught what I was saying about those people who showed up for the Derek Walcott Mill thing. They only wanted to be seen to be there. So we're very much into that, to be seen. I was there, man. I got a ticket. I was there. And St. Clair Daniel, the place is packed, and John Compton in his usual posture on the table. And St. Clair Daniel was telling the hagiography of Compton. And he said he arrived in St. Lucia just in time to rescue the virgins of the valley. And the whole house blew up with belly laughs. I'll never forget that. And you young people are wondering, one or two of you, what does he mean by that? Ask your dad. Ask your mom. Okay? That is what we have. And we have this gentleman who did a lot of good for the country, a lot of good for the country, as did Hitler do in his time for Germany. Hitler built the Autobahn, which many consider the greatest motorway in the world even now. He also murdered 6 million Jews and other people. So we have a habit of only remembering the bad and not remembering God. I tend to give both. But the good is what you put them there to do. And surprise, surprise, if they do the good you elected them to do. Surprise. They don't need awards. You notice how the politicians, and we sit there and participate. And at my 200, I refuse to do it anymore. And I did it in some ways to sit there and participate, be complicit in your own killing, in the killing of your children to come, into taking all the opportunities that might otherwise be there by actually turning a pedophile into father of the nation. Silence again. Drop a penny, somebody. Let's see if we can hear it. And just before I wrap up, I'm going to echo Calix George. What a disgrace. We have the things I'm talking about are in Ilbright in the morning, day newspapers, bound newspapers, only in the Star, because nobody else dared write it. I remember the first time I called Compton a liar in print. When I first came here, and I lied about something. I wrote about something he said on platform, and I said that was a lie, and this was the fact. And my godmother, I met her in the boulevard, and she said, "Larry, mon Dieu, Larry, you called a man a liar, we?" And I said, "But then he was." You know, I'm going to ask a favor. I have one more story to read. I really want to read it. I really want to read it. You guys mightn't get me again. The dark cloud that had forced Slam to postpone its debut was not without its silver lining. Now that the leadership issue had been shelved for later discussion, members had more time to prepare for their first public appearance. The show started early on a Friday evening, even as last-minute shoppers in William Peter Boulevard dashed in and out of M&C and JQ. The Slam cars started lining up around 6 o'clock. By 6:30, quarter to 7, it was obvious Caspri's residents were about to be served something special. The amplified calypso started abruptly, replaced after several minutes by an announcement. "Brothers and sisters, this is it. Drop everything and join the celebration. Follow the Slam motorcade. Join the St. Lucia Labor Action Movement." At first, there were only 4 or 5. Then there were 4 more, but soon there were enough to encircle the boulevard roundabout. By the time the honking motorcade arrived, bumper to bumper at the junction of Brazil Street and Chaussee Road, followed by scores of overexcited young people singing, jumping, whooping, gyrating to the irresistible sounds of Rudder and Shadow and Bob Marley, onlookers had good reason to recall the Pied Piper of Hamelin. The stated route was from the boulevard to Brazil Street, left on Chaussee through Miko Street to the evening's venue. They went instead all the way down the Chaussee, up Calvary Road, turned left at VG, then left again into the city. By the time the motorcade stopped at the parked open back truck outside Columbus Square that would serve as Slam's first platform, hundreds of fired up chanters were waiting to greet them. In an orderly line, they stepped up to the rickety, poorly lit platform, George Odlum in the lead. He had on a black boiler cap, Wellington boots, U.S. Army surplus shirt, and loose faded jeans. On his heels was Peter Josie, face more than ever stern behind a Castro beard. One by one, they occupied folding steel chairs at the back of the lorry. Julian Hunt, Tom Walcott, Neville Snack, Hilary Modeste, Carlisle Jean-Baptiste. Judging only by their attire, they might have been businessmen at a Chamber of Commerce convention. Hunt appeared concerned. He would say later that what I had noticed was his disappointment. Odlum had led him to believe that there would be more faces aboard the Slam truck, regular faces, faces of men and women of standing, faces not normally associated with politics. Perhaps they chose to support the evening's activity by mingling safely with the huge audience in the semi-dark square, I joked. Hunt was not amused. In all events, what a star-studded opening. No evening cocktails at Government House tonight, or at the Noons, the Gordons, the Carrascos. No picayune small talk over whiskey and salted cashew at the Flosacks, or at the British government representative, or at the Barclays Bank manager's residence overlooking VG Beach. This night was made for Slam. Never before had white, black, and in between sat shoulder to shoulder on the dry Columbus Square grass. Almost everywhere you looked, there were vendors of spicy aqua, vendors of fried on-the-spot fish and ital. Under the noses of uniformed policemen, many openly smoked cigarettes, legal and illegal. Others wet their throats with chilled Heinekens while shit-talking. Uppity government politicians pretended it was election time. They exchanged pleasantries, hugged constituents they barely recognized, while businessmen envisaged happier times with dreadlocked brethren and sistren from Wilton's Yard, Grass Street, True Rouge, Mondidon, and Shedali. Some even talked their talk in Creole, for Christ's sakes. Holy sweet potato, is that the tourism minister I see in tennis shoes and jeans? George Mallet in dungarees and polo shirt, sans bow tie, tete-a-teting with Conway residents and CDC tenants, maybe promising them jobs, new coats of paint in time for Christmas groceries too. And over there in the battered Mercedes, hey, it's my old friend JMD Bousquet, massive belly pressed tight against his steering wheel, heavy-lidded eyes like razor slits, missing nothing. And just a few yards from where he's parked, behind the white curtained glass window overlooking the square, could that be Vincent Flosac of Giraudian Flosac, the country's most prestigious law firm, second only to Gordon, Charles-McKell, and McNamara? Is that smarmy Henry's Shadow, Flosac's law partner and chairman of Compton's United Workers' Party? Wonder who else is peeping from behind that curtain. Peter Bagath? Hollis Bristol? John Compton? JMD's brother Alan? Huddled like paranoid Mises in a Sylvester the Cat cartoon? Inside the teeming square, Kenneth Foster is surrounded by barefooted, fit old men in faded red T-shirts and half a dozen or so scantily clad females, none older than 30. Relatives? Kenneth's kids with friends, perhaps? Not a chance. Fans? More than likely. Only the ever-smiling Ken knows for certain. The opposition Labour Party leader appears not to have a care in the world, but I know better. He's well aware of the conspiracy to pull away from him every electable member of his party, to leave him standing alone, finally to be shoved aside so Odlum and his group can take control. But Kenneth Foster was never anybody's fool. He had his informants within Slam. Between sips of Heineken, courtesy their leader, the loyal deadheads repeatedly swear they will not be moved. They assure him their party is strong as ever, never mind treacherous Neville Snack, never mind Carlisle Jean-Baptiste, the ingrate son of retired founder member Olio Jean-Baptiste. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, Ma Barnett is at it again. The old UWP shrew is in full voice. Not even Sparrow Amplified is a match for her characteristic squeals. Me gade hunt, oui, me gade hunt, oui. Salop là. Hunt vle di mwen, I ka asi avec Odlum, avec Snack et Josie. Yo tout se des ban communistes. John Compton se met yo, en chouzot. Oh, what a night. Right guard challenging Lord Ekabwit. Shalimar cozying up to Odell Rosehill. Wilton Yardley making out with Lima Call. An atmosphere to induce vertigo. I am rescued by Donley Norville, former frontline member of the recently defunct, ostensibly apolitical forum turned Black Power advocate, turned businessman, turned UWP conservative. Together we tippy-toe past prostrate, barely breathing human cask of alcohol, move closer to the truck parked a few yards from the Central Library on Bourbon Street. From inside a parked red Mini Austin, number 777, a male voice hails me. It's George Adams' dad. With him are his wife, generally known as Mustafi, and some of her son's more loyal apostles, Mr. and Mrs. Michael Bartlett and brother Sparson Helen, once a star goalie, as had been George Odlum, known in his heyday as the Flying Darky, before his Oxford days, long before his body weight made flying impossible, save courtesy British Airways. Spark points an index finger at another vehicle. He assures us the passengers include a 60-ish gentleman of means, Old Man Braff, a.k.a. Kissinger, string puller par excellence, by repute the UWP's main source of election funds. He's also president of the Public Service Commission, owner of the government's favorite printing establishment, and Premier John Compton's bosom buddy. It strikes me, as I make my investigating rounds in Columbus Square, that while the attendant majority appeared slam-friendly, itching for the main event to get underway, excited at the prospect of political change at long last, there were also several members of St. Lucia's upper class, long-established English operators of cable and wireless, suspect owners of idle lands, foreigner-owned and managed hotels. They laughed a lot and smiled whenever approached, but there was no joy in the sound they made. Their smiles lacked sincerity. Only their eyes spoke truth. In them, I saw apprehension, loathing, and an almost palpable fear. That's for me to be right in the morning.
It's been 2 hours, I must say, of riveting conversation. And it looks like, based on the appetite of the audience, that we may have to have a second round of this, Mr. Wayne, at some point in time. But we are out of time, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Wayne will be here for a little longer if you want to engage him personally. But we really want to thank everyone who showed up today. I think this is something that definitely has to go down in the history books. I think the openness of conversation is important. Can we have you engage with Mr. Wayne after Mrs. Modest?
Not him essentially. I want to talk to the young people about Hunter Francois just a little bit.
We can do it. We can do it after. We can do it after. Let's just sign off our formal event because we're going to be here. Yes, we're going to have a little social after this. So you can remain and Mrs. Modest will engage. But we need to sign off formally. Again, on behalf of the South Louis Community College and the Hunter J. Francois Library in particular, I want to thank all those who joined us online and in person for being here. And I'm sure I can extend on behalf of the Board of Governors, the chairs here, and management, our thanks to the Hunter J. Francois Library, led by Mrs. McDiarmid, for organizing those events. And I think I can also promise that there will be more of this put on by the college in the future. So once again, thank you very much, librarians. Have a good mixer tomorrow as your final activity. And please continue to support the library and continue to support the literary push that we have here at the South Louis Community College. And thank you so much.
If if I can dare make a suggestion, you might want to think about a format um, that would allow 3 or 4 St. Lucian writers to sit and exchange views. But you need an audience for that. You need to invite the other schools. You know, you need some room, and you need to have some ideas what the kids want to know about, because they don't know anything, and they can't make comparisons. They don't even know. They can't even appreciate where they are right now because they can't put it back to it. And you see those GIS every ceremony, they play the same things over. That's about the biggest brainwashing thing there is, because most of them are not true. They are interviews done with prime ministers with no confrontational questions. Somebody sits there and says, what do you think of so and so? And a rattle. I mean,
That's the nature of GIS, though.
pardon me?
That's the nature of GIS. It's a
But
government
the problem
information
is
service.
that's the only record, and you are teaching your kids that. That is what you're teaching
That's
your
why there was
kids.
talk.
Pardon?
That's why there was talk. So you could bring them on if they came on.
I've been avoiding talk. I've really been avoiding talk because I just don't want anybody to even think that this is part of the live family. People tell me, Rick, you have your own audience. No, 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 no. I am so disgusted with what's passing for lives and what the so-called media in St. Lucia allow. I know freedom of expression and all that, but even freedom of expression has some responsibility that has to go with it, you know. It really is terrible.
So as we end, I know there are at least, we have one of our staff members and a student who will engage with you specifically on lapses and felicities. So again, ladies and gentlemen, as we socialize, we will have for Mr. Wayne, but let me just sign out live. Did I miss something on the program? Sorry? A formal vote of thanks. I am so sorry. There's a presentation of a token to Mr. Wayne, and one of our students will be making that presentation. Students come forward to make the, you, young lady, the gentleman came,
Mr. Wayne.
Sorry. Oh.
Oh. Well,
What we got?
that's a good question. You to find out, the rest of us to wonder.
Thank you very much.
Well, before
Prove my
before
understanding.
before you hand it, on behalf of the Hunter Francois Library and South Sissy and us young students, as we read your book and listened here at the presentation, this is our token of thanks and appreciation for making this presentation comical and easy to understand and understand. It was very fun. Yeah. It was topical, it was very informative, and it was enjoyable. So I want to say thank you for all that and coming up here to talk to us about it.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy it.
Thank you so very much, everybody, and let us have the interaction.